Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Gayla Tia Strong. I'm a physical therapist who got 100% on my NPTE, and this led me to found SPT with me, which is an NPTE prep platform. If you enjoy what you see and you're studying for the NPTE, check out our courses at sptwithme.com. Now for what you're actually here for, let's talk about the MCID, or Minimal Clinically Important Difference. The MCID, or Minimal Clinically Important Difference, is a statistics term. Specifically, it's a value that refers to the smallest value that we can get showing a true and meaningful change in a person or our patient. So first of all, as a physical therapist, when would you even use this? Well, the most common thing that we use this for is when we're dealing with functional outcome measures. So this is what we're going to use examples of. So it's the smallest value with respect to the functional outcome measure results. So if the test is measured in seconds, the MCID is going to be represented in seconds. If it's a number scale like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the MCID is going to be represented in the same way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The word change is important. It's a change because it's based off the difference or change between the results of the first time that a patient performs a functional outcome measure and the second time that they perform the same functional outcome measure. Of course, you can do a functional outcome measure, for a third time, fourth time, doesn't matter. But the MCID is always with respect to the difference between just two of them. So let's use an example. Let's use the example of the mini-best functional outcome measure. The MCID for the mini-best is 4 points. And later in this video, we will talk about how they got to 4 points. But just for now, understand that it is 4 points. The idea of the MCID is that if a person does the mini-best and they improve by 4 points or more from the first time that they took it to the second time they took it, this suggests that your patient is going to have a clinically relevant and meaningful difference in the mini-best and what the mini-best is trying to address. Well, the mini-best purpose is to address balance deficits. So if a person has this score of an improvement of 4 points or more, we as physical therapists are to interpret this as a clinically relevant improvement in their balance. Let's use a different example. Now let's say that this person gets 4 points or less of an improvement from test 1 to test 2. So let's say this person only improved by 2 points. Well, 2 points is less than 4 points, right? If your difference in score is less than the MCID, this suggests that we are to interpret this as not having a clinically relevant change in the patient with respect to what the functional outcome is measuring. Remember, the mini-best is about addressing balance deficits. So if I only increase by 2 points, which is less than the MCID, less than 4 points, I, as a physical therapist, and to interpret this as, no, my patient really did not improve in their balance. Now, one of the biggest questions that you might have about this topic is how? How did the people who created the functional outcome measures actually get the value of the MCID? What does this clinically meaningful change actually mean? Well, of course, it's based on research, and really there are two things that the MCID is based on. The first thing that the value of the MCID is based on is the MDC, the minimal detectable change. So the MDC, it's another statistics term. This one essentially is the smallest value that a person can get in a functional outcome measure in which the difference of their score from doing it from the first time to the second time is beyond just getting that score due to chance. So here's an example. The MDC, or minimal detectable change, for the mini-best is 3.5 points. So let's say my patient got a 20 out of 28 on their first try of the mini-best. I have them do it again, and a month later, let's say they now have a 22 out of 28. So a difference of 2 points. Again, 2 points is less than 3.5, the MDC. And 3.5, like I said, is the smallest number that our patient could get to be considered anything aside from just chance itself. So this must mean that at 2 points more, this improvement is just due to chance and expected error. So essentially, if this person never went to therapy, they could still improve by 2 points. With that being said, it should make sense that with the MCID, where we're talking about a value that should reflect a true change in our patient, this value of the MCID should be larger than that of the MDC. That the value that provides the clinically relevant and actually meaningful difference should be larger or at least equal to the value that's just beyond statistical error or chance, the MDC. The second thing that researchers base the MCID off is the patient's perception of their improvement. Now, of course, it's all based on research. So likely what happens is that a bunch of patients are asked to perform a functional outcome measure to begin with. It could be something like addressing balance or something subjective like perceived disability or addressing strength. So essentially any functional outcome measure. You're going to have your patient perform it once at baseline, then they're going to be treated with whatever interventions that they need to address what the purpose of the functional outcome measure is, and then after a while they're going to perform the functional outcome measure again to assess the success of the interventions. Now this is where the analyzing of information and figuring out the value of the MCID comes into play. The first thing is to collect data on the change that occurred between test 1 and test 2 for each patient or participant. So did your patient improve in their, let's say, timed up and go? Was it by 10 seconds or was it by 4 seconds? Did they increase their sit-to-stand number by 2 times or by 7 times? Or last example, did they increase in their perceived disability quality of life by a value of 3 or was it 7, subjective measurement? So the value and unit of measurement is obviously going to depend on what the functional outcome measure is though. But now we have a bunch of data with patients and these numbers identifying the change. So what happens next is that researchers then are going to take their time to interview each and every single one of these patients and see what the patient's perceived improvement or lack of improvement was. So here's an example. A researcher might ask a patient, well, compared to the first test, how do you feel? Are you able to perform your work duties more easily now? Or were you able to return to sport? Now, realistically, there are a lot of different questions that researchers can ask because it really just depends on the purpose of the functional outcome measure. Obviously, if it's a measure of addressing disability, then a question might be, do you feel like your disability has lessened? Or on a scale of 0 to 10, how much do you think you've improved? Or if it's, a measure of fear of activities, maybe do you feel more confident now? And how so on a scale, things like that. So essentially, researchers are going to consider a bunch of information, the quantity of their value of change in the test, as well as the patient's subjective perception of their improvement or lack thereof, objective findings. Then they're going to base and compare between all of those different factors among a lot of different patients. To put it in some sort of objective value, here's an example. Well, it seems on average that if a person scored 4 or more points more than they did on their first attempt at the mini best, these patients on average seem to report that they did have fewer falls, or they did feel more confident with their balance, or they were able to return to activities and hobbies that they've once done, etc., whatever they decide to ask. While, on the other hand, on average, it seemed like all the participants that we asked who scored a difference of 3 points or less, that these patients, they really didn't give too great of feedback, or they didn't really notice anything. Whatever it is that they asked, they just didn't notice as much of a change. So what I want you to recall, though, is that the MCID is the smallest value that suggests any change at all beyond just chance. So a person could score well over the MCID, and the effect on that patient's perception could be way more positive. The MCID represents the slightest bit of true change in what that functional outcome measure hopes to address, right? So I'm going to tell you this. I don't know what questions specifically that these researchers asked for the outcome measures. The hope is that the researchers that were involved in the decision-making of the process of deciding the MCID, that they did their due diligence in asking the appropriate questions for their patients. Now, what's nice about the MCID is that it's already done, and you as the physical therapist or clinician just have to choose the right functional outcome measure to implement and then utilize that information of the MCID to judge whether or not your patient is improving from the treatments that you're giving them. But at the same time, given what I just said, it could be beneficial for you as the clinician to maybe do some research into these functional outcome measures to see maybe what they asked. What were the important questions that they asked? What was important to them? And is that important to you with respect to your specific patient? If you enjoyed material being taught this way and you're studying for the NPTE, check out our courses at sptwithme.com.